So we're going to do a couple of things today. We have a slightly longer class than we've had the last few, than we had yesterday, because yesterday was on a bridge schedule. Um, we're going to start with, I'm going to make some of you introduce yourselves and tell me a little bit about why you're here. And we can't, sometimes people do this on the first day of class for all 25 people, and then it just becomes like an hour of class and nothing ever gets done. So we're not going to do that. Every day I'm going to ask 5 of you to volunteer to come across and share. And I've Professor Mukherjee just shared your Google note with me, so I have some sense of why you wanted to take this class. But I'm really curious about what it is you're starting to think of wanting to work on over the next week or this week. What you want to bring to this class and what you want to work with in this class. So I'm going to start with a slight. There's a slight introduction section for just maybe like 10 minutes or so. And then we'll use the first half of class to recap what we did yesterday, because I want to make sure we're all taking away. The thing with a discussion-heavy class like this is that you can forget what it is, the important takeaways from each piece is. So we'll go over briefly the start of, essentially the main points of what it is from yesterday's lecture. I want to make sure you remember and can use in anything that you're working on this week. And then I want to start by introducing the 3 pieces that you read for class today, right? So there's a reason I made you read the Governance Feminism piece by Haley and colleagues, alongside Ratna Kapoor's Gender and Alterity piece with Mari Matsuda's Where's Your Body, right? That on first glance, that seems like not a very obvious connection of 3 pieces. And it's a class on intersectionality. So these are not the pieces. Teaching intersectionality without offering Kimberly Crenshaw's classic suggestion about it seems a little bit non-linear, right? But I did that intentionally. I think when you teach a class in a context like this about intersectionality, you're already starting from a different perspective than I would be if I was teaching an intersectionality class in an American classroom, right? So sex and gender and race are complicated, but they don't travel seamlessly in the same way across different sites, right? So if you use there's intersectionality is such a buzzword that you can use that and apply it almost interactionally very quickly to the Indian context in a bunch of different ways. But I think the harder work is to try and figure out what intersectionality does to the individual and what it does to the institutions. And so today's class is really us working through that. So that I have a couple of exercises in mind for us to think through that, and then we'll apply the concepts that from the 3 pieces that you've learned today to the intersection. To what I think is an important intersectionality paradigm. And so that's sort of like the class plan for the day. So how many of you, did you all get eyes on the readings for today? Okay, did you have a sense that, did you feel like that it was too much? Was it too much reading? Okay, some of you think it's too much, some of you think it's okay. Did you get 2 hours and feel frustrated again?
No.
Did you find these readings more accessible than the previous readings? Okay, interesting. Okay, so we're getting a sense of what works and what doesn't, which is helpful. I'm going to keep it at about 2 or 3 readings a class, because I want you to get eyes on all the readings and build from that, rather than give you less or more and have you recalibrate. Okay, let's start with introduction. So thank you for all of you who've written your names out. If you're just joining us, please write your name on a piece of paper so I can I know how to refer to you along with pronouns. Does someone want to get started? Someone want to tell me, and it can be as simple as, your name, like where you're from, if you want, or a home's a complicated concept, but whatever it is you think defines you most centrally, and what you want to work on this week. And it could be the starting of what you wrote yesterday. It can be what you're going to work on today, because the last part of classes I told you yesterday is to work on your assessment. We give you back your papers and you work on your assessment. But does anyone want to get started? Don't make me cold call, because that's just not fun. Also, I do that for my day job, so I don't want to do it in like my vacation job as well. Ananya, because I'm staring at you. I didn't want to cold call. You could have just, if someone had said yes, I would have cold called.
My name is Ananya. I'm from Hyderabad.
Okay.
The reason that I chose the course was because I mean, I have general idea of how gender works in reality in everyday life, but it is all surface level of idea of how things intersect and all. So I wanted to like challenge my own views and also learn a lot more about like gender in reality in real life. And today's concept also is very close to me because in current like Indian context, feminism is a lot Savarna kind of feminism, and does not go into caste or any other intersection, which kind of undermines the entire scholarship on feminism and also the movement. So I wanted to like work on that.
Is that what you work? Is that what you want to work on this week?
Yeah.
So you want to work on non-Savarna feminisms this week? That's awesome. And is there? And are you're at Nalsar?
Yeah.
Okay. And are you? So you're currently a student.
Yes. I'm a third year student.
Okay. We're just doing introductions. We want put your names on a piece of paper with pronouns if that's helpful, and someone else. We're just doing 5 people are going to introduce themselves. We're going to do a couple of people every day until I know all your names and what you're working on. If you're all staring at me, I'll stare back. Like, just come on, put your hands up. And I know apparently it's early in the morning, although it's midday for me. But this is Shruti.
So I'm Shruti. I'm also from Hyderabad. I'm from Nalsar. I wanted to take this course because the more I studied, like throughout the semesters, I understood that it's not like the law is not the same for everyone in this country, and I wanted to understand how it impacts all the different genders. And yeah, this course seemed right for me to learn more about it.
What got you interested in
Family law.
You took a family law class?
We all had.
Oh, the first year family law class. Yeah.
So when I was reading those laws, like especially Hindu Marriage Act, Succession Act, they are not really neutral laws. So that's when I started to realize that law is actually not really neutral.
Did you think law was neutral before you came to law school?
Yeah, that's what I actually thought because I didn't know much. So
Yeah.
I thought it was, maybe it's the same for everyone. No, it's good that we have law.
Yeah.
But once I started reading, I realized it's not really neutral for everybody.
Huh.
Yeah, I just want to learn more.
And so, what are you working on this week? What is the project you want to work on this week?
Actually, I picked something else yesterday, but I kind of want to change that now.
So, what did you pick?
Yesterday, I started thinking about a case I came across during my internship. It was about a dowry death.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought I could do something more personal.
But what was the question that you had with the dowry death? You were just
it was like the thing is that like the husbands were easily getting away with it, even though it was like 16 years since like the murder happened, and the guy has been on bail for over 6 years now, and then he's gonna be out fully. So it didn't make sense to me, and I've seen that happen like twice or thrice in the same office. So yeah, I was just shocked. I thought that provision wouldn't be that easy to get away with. So.
And what do you think you want to work on instead?
I'm actually really confused.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Someone else? Kranti?
Yeah.
Is that actually your? I really thought I could read so well. This is what happens when you get to your mid-40s and you're like, I don't need glasses, but apparently I think I might need glasses.
Yeah, hi. Kranti, my pronouns are honestly anything works.
Okay.
I'm a practicing lawyer. I practice labor and employment law at a law firm in Bangalore. And I graduated from here in 2023. So I keep coming back to campus for courses like this.
That's awesome.
And yeah, in terms of my interest in this course in particular is these questions, while they seemed purely academic while I was in a law school, I keep encountering them on a daily basis in my practice. For example, we are interpreting the word women under the Maternity Benefits Act to see whether that extends
Trans women
to
could-
trans
yeah.
women and
Yeah.
uh, and persons who do not identify as women. So,
I think I know what firm you're in.
do you?
I think I do.
Okay. Yeah. So I just want to understand how. Uh,
And is there a pushback to that? Because this is obviously in Karnataka, right? Like this is,
yes.
you're working in Karnataka. That's
Yeah,
what you said.
yeah.
You said you're in Bangalore.
Bangalore. Yeah.
Yeah, because the Tamil Nadu code like has read that very strictly and said it includes trans women, like because under the new act, like you can't unread trans women into women. But other states are trying to follow it, but also recognize that they don't have a linear precedent to follow it. And so it's been really interesting to see how neighboring states that are deemed more progressive from a very top-down perspective are actually not as progressive.
Yeah. So my primary interest is in just understanding what it means for something to be gendered in law.
Yeah.
Like, is it just so straightforward on the grounds of gender in terms of excluding certain genders, or is it something more than that? Maybe at an abstract level, I want to understand how gender terms work, and as a response, when we do a feminist reading of law or a queer reading of law, what does it mean? Like, are we working with some values, or are we working with just the mere representational identity politics thing? That's something I've been thinking a lot about. It's not very clear in my mind yet. It's all over the place, and also because I don't get time to think about these things at my workplace.
Yeah. Also, the idea that things are all over the place is also a feminist reading, right? Like there's a way in which we're taught that if you know the law, you understand the theory, you're supposed to read it and you're supposed to know linearly what the ABC of it is. So if someone says, what did you learn yesterday? You should be able to say, I learned this, and then this was what came out of it, and the analysis was X. But feminist and queer readings are about confusion, are about agoraphobia, are about not knowing the whole thing, which is complicated because then, you know, then the question becomes, what are like you say, what are the ethics of reading if actually confusion is the output? Then do you actually even know you're reading it? But I think I'm glad I'm glad you consider taking the class in the middle of work, because there is a through line in this class that I hope we come away with collectively and individually, is that gender is not just about where gender is used. So it's not just about, like dowry deaths are an important case, right? But or Dalit feminism, like these are all things where gender is in the concept itself and it's obvious. And I hope what we take away, I hope I get to impress upon you during these 5 days that we're all thinking together, that even if gender is not present at all, gender is present. Right? Even if nothing says, even if there's no mention of something, in the same way caste is always in the room whether or not there is caste. You will notice there isn't a directed caste reading in this week, because I think you cannot read caste as one reading. It has to be every day in everything we read. Like I think the fact that someone can think the law is neutral, right? It is from a position that actually is insulated, and often the insulation happens because we haven't yet had to deal with it, right? Like we haven't yet had to deal with it. For a lot of people, that's not an option. For a lot of people, they have thought about it. Like the best way to think of it is, when someone says, I don't know what my caste is, I've always said, well, that definitely means you're high caste, because people for whom caste has been central to their identity never don't know have never forgotten, in the same way that race never gets forgotten, right? Or people outside the gender binary that have to define themselves never question whether this is like a thing that comes up. It only is not an issue when you have not had that be primed. And so I hope the thing we take away collectively, even if there is confusing outputs, is that gender is present at all points and it's embedded in everything in the same way. And when I say gender, I don't just mean sex or biological gender, but I think like a gendered understanding, which is the understanding of how non-linear things can be, or how differentially problematic things can be, is always inherent. And yeah, and is that what you're working on? You're working on the labor on the sort of benefits logic for trans women.
Yes.
That's what you want. Okay, great. We have time for, I think, maybe one or two more introductions. So, is that Miss Ba? Do you want to say? You don't want to say hello. Okay. Kirtana, do you want to say hi?
I'm Ketana. I'm a second year student from Nalsa. I got interested in this course because we had sociology of law last semester. And initially, actually, before I wanted to do law, I wanted to do sociology because I liked the fact that it was very personal. Because it felt for me that I could shape my experiences into something that I could study. And then because of circumstances, I had to choose law. And in fact, opposite to what they have said, I have always come to the perception that I thought law was very personal because it was of the people. I mean, I didn't have information about what law exactly was. And I always read about sensational cases where there was a lot of
That's right.
action and a lot of
Because
passion.
only they get reported.
Yeah, a lot of passion behind these judgments. And it was only when I came to law school that I realized that it speaks of the human experience so deadpan and so universal that I was surprised in my first year. Because even legal methods was one of our first classes. So that was the expectation I was coming in with. And then when I read contracts and then when I read family law to a certain extent, it was very surprising to me because I have come from like a humanities background, from sociology, and to see sociology in the curriculum, I thought that there may be a connection. And for our sociology professor themselves to be like, oh, the law is neutral, but there are these aspects to it. Criticizing law school while judging us the way law school would judge us. The Duncan Kennedy reading.
That's right.
Yeah, the criticism that they were teaching us about, applying those same criticisms to us, felt it was a very
and the same criticisms, meaning the way in which they evaluated, and the fact that you have grades or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of like the last thing that Duncan Kennedy had said about introducing leftist groups in law school, encouraging critical thinking instead of this rule by letter law, and then just next hour being contracts class where it's just rule and then case and then this kind of procedural kind of, it was very shocking to me. And then that's why I wanted to come to something that was sociology centered when it comes to gender, because contracts and all them seem to forget that being a woman shapes, like if that's your experience, shapes almost every aspect of whatever you're in. Even being in a classroom, even if you're more women than men, seeing men more speak up in class, it shapes you as a person, no matter where you go.
And is that what you're thinking of working on? Like perhaps like legal education and is that
I'm not exactly sure, honestly. I just wanted to get to know more. What I wrote yesterday was about a completely different thing. But I'm just curious to see what we explore in class today, and I'll come to a conclusion later.
Great. Well, not much later because we only have 5 days together. So it'll have to be later today. It's interesting how so many of us are talking about identity. Right? And I think one of the themes I want to explore in this class is whether identity is a helpful container for thinking about for thinking about gender, but also more generally about equality. Right? We're all, I think as lawyers, we realize that categories are important and these containers are important because then they allow us to signal what good outcomes are or bad outcomes are. But like identity is also trapping, it's also limiting, right? So there's in the way that, and I think again, like using the example of the genderqueer identity, which is like what I'm writing about right now. So it's what's in my mind. It's really helpful to enforce, for example, like a pronoun choice or whatever, right? Like, but it's an identity category. It's like saying, I want this, and so I want you to affirm me in this way. But it's also limiting, right? And so I noticed you said any pronouns, and I've been toying with the idea of saying any pronouns to people. But if I say any pronouns, I'll only get she. Right? Like it will not be a rotating pronoun usage. I know I will only get she. And so then it becomes, is it really any pronoun? If I'm in a world where I cannot get the affirmation that I want from everybody, then should I offer that generosity, that knowing entirely well that it's not going to be read as generosity, but just acceptance? And I struggle with that. I don't have, like I said, I don't have an answer. I've taught this for 10 years and I don't have an answer. So it's not just that you've only taken 5 days off to think about this. Like I live in this world and I don't have an answer. And I think it's helpful to get comfortable with not having answers. And I really hope that's another feminist practices we get away from a class like this, right? It's okay to not know, because there's no noise. Like I think there's something really paternalistic and hierarchical about and colonizing about having knowledge and saying, I know. Because if you know, that means you have an entire category of understanding that's complete. And I don't think any of us really know, right? Like we're all emerging. And this idea of flux is a really important pattern in this class, I hope, which is just because something is in flux does not mean it's not real, right? Just because a category is not concrete does not mean it's not real. In fact, most categories are not concrete. Law has this fiction that assumes that some categories are concrete, and that fiction helps the law pretend like it is much more authoritative than it actually is. And I think that's the tension that we're playing with in a class like this, right? Which is, how do you sit with things that actually don't have clear categories, and how do you work through them in a range of different ways? Oh, we have two Ananyas in the class. That's great. I'm going to call on the other Ananya to give us the last check-in. So just tell us tell us a little bit about where you're joining us from and what you hope to work on this week.
So I'm from an L03 and I'm also a third year student. And I'm not quite very sure about what I want to work on just yet. But like I shared in class, I think the idea of women in the private versus the public sphere. So even if a woman has ambitions
Yeah.
and wants to, make some headway in the public sphere, I feel like the private sphere is always there pulling her back into where her supposed real place is. Right? There is always that push and pull force at play. And I'm not quite sure yet how to connect it with law, but I think this idea of women and space is something that's pretty interesting to me. And as for why I wanted to take this course, I think gender and law is a dimension that I do find very intriguing since my first year. And I try to read about it in the news, otherwise on the net, but all of those are very small and disjunct efforts. And so this seemed like something much more wholesome for me to come to. And I just got off my jurisprudence course from the fifth semester, and we did critical legal studies and feminist studies and postmodernism and all of that but in very small bits.
So you got that insight into the bunch of different
But
theories.
that just gives you like small pockets of insight which you then have to mug up for exams, and then that's just how you remember it.
Yeah.
So I just feel like this course will like give me a more holistic idea of how gender interacts with me.
Yeah.
That's my name.
Is when you say spaces, do you mean physical spaces or like institutional spaces? Because yesterday's example that you were telling us was much more about the actual, and how physical spaces are metaphors for larger spaces, right? Like the fact that you have to learn for a PhD reading, like not in an office, but like wherever this, like, is that what you mean by space?
Yes.
Okay, so it's the idea of like space that you encounter could actually be a reflection on the larger embedded institutional inequalities. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for sharing. I'm going to do this every day, and by the end of this, I hope you all get a chance to. You're all going to get a chance to share. But I find it easier to do 4 or 5 introductions a day rather than spend the first hour on it. So thank you all for sharing. So I just want to spend a couple of minutes making sure we're all on the same page about what the takeaways from yesterday were, right? So yesterday's class was on it was really like the introductional grounding of how to think about gender as a structure and gender as like a kind of performance. And I think the idea of gender as performance is helpful because all of us are performing gender. So these roles are just constantly in flux and they're in play and they're central to how all of us think about ourselves. The Williams piece was really, I hope, the starting point for those of you that want to think about positionality. I hope all of us think about our positionality. So when you're writing this piece in the next 5 days, I hope you think about what it means to be the person who has the identities that you have, writing about the things that you are writing, right? How does that limit you? How does that exaggerate some things? How does that not exaggerate some things? Like all of us have positionality. Nobody is devoid of it. All of us have a certain context from which we understand things. And the real takeaway is whether writing for, or the real question is whether there is a reflection of that positionality in the thing that we're understanding or the thing that we're studying. We can never really completely divorce ourselves from our positionality, but positionality really matters. The Williams piece was also central to thinking about where and when we think about language as confusing or clear, right? It's a conversation that came up yesterday. I hope it stays with you, that sometimes really personal, dense writing, right, or what can be read as dense writing, can actually open up spaces of interrogation that aren't obvious from first reading. And that's part of the feminist and queer critique too, to allow ourselves to read law differently, to allow ourselves to see law in everything, right? William sees law when there's a dog on the street. William sees law when she's sitting next to someone else. William sees law when someone says hello to her, right? Like there is a way in which her her race and gender and identity is never lost, right? And she talks about it all the time because it is always present with her, for her, in the way she writes about it. And writing about law like that can seem unserious. In fact, you can assume she was unserious. The reason I made you read the chapter on commercial laws is because she herself recognizes that she could be read as unserious, right? She says, well, this is different from understanding what objective law is, but subjective law or subjective readings of the law are also intimate portrayals of what law can be or what law can do, right? And so that's and the reason that's the starting point of a course like this is because I want that to be how you consider law. Like there is not just law in things that say gender or things that actually involve gendered concepts. There's also law more generally. I mean, there's also gender more generally in everything, just as how law is in everything. So the last piece that I wrote that I enjoyed writing was an article on the movie Bend It Like Beckham, and I argue that actually that's a great allegory to read the marriage judgment from, right? Like, so when things don't fail in the courts, rewatching movies like this are helpful because it reminds us that queerness is always in plain sight, and the only people who saw Bend It Like Beckham and didn't think it was a queer movie were straight people, right? Because for queers, it was always a queer movie, right? Like for queers of my generation, it was the queerest movie you could watch, and it was even queerer because how many of you watched this? Okay, so it's a movie. It's a movie about two girls who play not bas. What's the sport they play? Football. Correct. See, I don't. That's how little I know about the sport that was played in that movie. I was like, this is a great queer movie, and people are like, the sports movie. That's like, what, there was sports in that movie? I don't even remember that there was sports in the movie. But it was a portrayal of a South Asian woman who grows up in the diaspora in London, and really her love for soccer and Beckham, and who's a football player, I'm assuming. I know he's a football player, but it's like I only know that because he's married to Posh Spice. But there's a way in which the movie traces this person, getting into soccer, but also there's a underlying friendship that she has with this other person that, to any queer viewer, right, felt like it had potential. And I remember being confused and a little bit heartbroken when at the end of the movie she dates. And I'm sorry, this is a spoiler, but the movie's been out 30 years, so if you haven't seen it, this is not on me. So it ends with her with the coach, right? Which, if you think about it, this is like, it's suspect how old this girl is, right? So there's like, I'm like, this is a 17, 18-year-old. The coach is clearly older. Like, this is no, everyone thought this was a romantic comedy. And I was like, yeah, the romantic comedy is because she's in love with her best friend, and the best friend is definitely gay. Like, this is like such a clear, yeah. And I think it's helpful. For me, it was an allegory for how, when things are not expressly stated, they can still keep open the possibility of reading that stuff that is clearly set to you. Because Fire, the movie, the queer movie that was made, I remember theaters being burnt down because they were threatening to show Fire in the 90s, right? So that you're thinking of, so on the one hand, you have a movie like Fire that was active queer representation. And then you have a movie like Bend It Like Beckham, which was not at all queer except for the people that wanted to read queerness into it. And part of the argument I make is that when things don't actively tell you that they are queer, they actually have a longer, more organic possible life, because you could watch it with your grandmother and be like, oh, isn't this a fun movie? And like instantly feel like, oh, this is really cute. And have this capacity for experience that's yours without it being about identity. right? And so I offer that as an example to think about how that sounds like it's not a law article, but it was very much a law article. I use that as a way to read the marriage judgment and say, well, yeah, we can sit and cry a river about how we don't have marriage equality, or we can say, what are the other ways in which we can queer this jurisprudence up without asking for the very straight things we're asking for. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think we should all have rights to do everything. But there are ways in which it offers us readings that are not just about queer bait or queer death, right? But also queer hope. And I think that's helpful in writing like this. So I think for me, Williams is like a really helpful way to think about what do you experience that you can read as law, because law is everywhere, right? So you don't get restricted for where your sites are. So the reason I got you to start writing about something where gender mattered to you yesterday was because I don't need it to be about the law. I actually wanted to know. I mean, I don't care. I mean, I'm agnostic about whether it's about the law or not, because I trust that everything has to do with the law, whether you like it or not, and everything has to do with gender, whether we like it or not, right? When you start from that perspective, everything is embedded in the kinds of contestations that it can do. So the example, Ananya, that you gave us yesterday, which was so helpful to ground, how you were thinking about it. For me, the law there is patriarchy. Like, just because there isn't a code doesn't mean it's not law. Law is patriarchy, right? And it's so embedded that all of us are thinking of it even as something seems normal or natural or possible. So there's the where you see law, if you actually look close enough, could be anywhere, could be everywhere, right? So the ways in which space gets used is a kind of social code. And those of you that have done sociology of law like recognize that social codes are laws. In fact, they're even more strictly enforceable than laws that are not strictly enforceable, right? So the two things I want you to take away from Williams is that positionality really matters, and that narrative is helpful to locate law and gender. These are the two. If there's two things you get away from that reading, let it be this, and let it inform you that whatever you're writing about is important precisely because of the way in which it's set up. The Sarah Ahmed reading, sort of, we didn't get into it a lot because I hope we keep coming back to it. Is the two main pieces there is this idea of like the sticky concept, right? Like what stays, what fumbles, what always reverberates and comes back to you. And, in some sense, patriarchy is a sticky concept, right? You can never lose it because it's always present and it always comes up. And then the other idea is like feminist homework. Who does feminist homework? When are you seen as an angry feminist for doing the homework? When is it acceptable and when is it not acceptable? And how do you then work around those acceptances, right? So that idea of feminist homework is really helpful, because everything we do in a class like this, I hope, is feminist homework, right? It's feminist homework precisely because it's being done in places, in spaces, in crevices that are not called the law, right? And once you start looking at it like that, like, it's hard to sit at a table and not observe it. I mean, it's very overwhelming because then you're seeing it everywhere. But it's also helpful because it doesn't contain where you see law, where you see feminist or queer possibility only in the classroom or only in the law or only in sort of those kinds of realities. The Ridgway piece that we did yesterday was actively about framing. I think it's a really helpful theory to think about framing and background frameworks as a starting point to consider identity and possibility and rights consciousness and responses. And I think for those of you that are writing about comparisons, for those of you that want to like play with this idea of play is also central in both those readings, who want to write about framing, it would be helpful to think about what are the background frameworks that exist and who gets to challenge them and who gets to not challenge them. So those are those. I mean, the reason we start there is because I think that is what the structure is. The one piece you didn't read that I also want to just highlight is feminists also think about gender as active structure. They think about it as happening at the individual level, happening at the institutional level, and happening at the interactional level, right? So Barbara Risman has an important sociology piece from the 70s on how gender gets done and reinforced at every level because of not just your individual identity, but also because of interactions that happen with you and institutional scripts that we've all embedded in, whether we like it or not. You didn't read this piece, so don't worry if this is like not something that you've read. It's in the additional reading for yesterday's class. But I want to mention it because I think a lot of you will find that framework helpful. When you're approaching a question, ask yourself how much of this is about the individual, how much of this is about the interaction between the individual and others around them, and how much of it is about the institutional scripts that they have internalized, irrespective of whether someone has primed it or not. And I'm sorry, Ananya, I'm going to keep using your example because that's the one example we have in class, right? So in the example that you gave us, the site that you gave us, it might be the individual's own limits of should I do this, can I do this, do I have the time to do this, and if you all remember, this was about a couple where the female goes back much later in life to go get a PhD, and like the partner has had a job, but also like sort of uses the home as a possible site for work, but the woman doesn't feel the same ease of using the home as a site of work. And I think at the individual level, it's just, is this a choice or is this a requirement? Am I actually doing this from a place of privilege, or am I doing this? Whatever it is, right? You can question whether it's needed. Necessity is always seen as an important thing. The interactions are how other people buffer it. It's if you say, oh, I want to take up the office, whether someone says, nay, like I have to take it, whether there's a ordering of who should take the office, or whether if someone took the office, it would be seen as a very feminist political act. Right? If someone says, if you get to do this, I should also get to do this, and it's an aggressive political act, right? When status quo gets questioned, it's seen as very questionable, right? So this is true of, since we put Dalit feminism on the table too, right? Like this caricature of the angry Dalit feminist, right, is so central and so violent and so problematic, precisely because anyone who questions the status quo is seen as doesn't have a choice. They have to do it in a certain way, right? Like, and if they are seen as not civil, which is not a luxury that's afforded to many people, it is seen as problematic. So the interactions also matter. So it's not just at the individual level. The interactions get coded differently depending on who you're interacting with. And then there's the institutional logic of what should a woman do and when should a woman do it, and and so that's what you've been calling the embeddedness. Like, why do they get stuck in it? That's the interactions, right? That's the institutions. But the interactions and the institutions and the individual they're not separate categories. They're all working together all the time. And so our job as scholars, or our job as observers, is to, in any site, think about, well, where's the individual, what is the individual mechanism here? What's the interactional mechanism here? And how are institutional cultural scripts reinforcing this? And I think it's a really helpful tool to keep in your back pocket as you think about your papers for the week, right? Like, it's really to think about how much of the question I'm asking is individual, how much of it is interactional, when does it get reinforced interactionally, and what are the cultural scripts that can either hurt or help the ways in which this is getting reinforced more institutionally. And I think that's I find it very helpful as a starting point to think about gender, and maybe it'll help you to, given the kinds of questions that you're asking. Notes, questions before I go into today's readings? Yeah.
The reading that
Barbara Risman. I'll send you it's on an additional list of readings, and I don't know if Ananta's made it available. Do you not have a list of additional readings? Okay, so I have recommended additional readings for every week, that if you decide to write something based on that paper, I would send. So I'll send you the link. Okay, other questions, thoughts, notes, reactions? Okay. Before we get into we're at 45 minutes. You all look like you're going to sleep in front of me, which is really hard to lecture to. So I'm going to make you take a 10-minute break, walk it off, do what you need to do, and when you come back, be ready to discuss the next 3 things that we're discussing. Okay, we're going to start with an exercise before we do today's readings, because I feel like that's the only way to get all of you to start talking. Okay, so what we're going to do is do these things called, we're going to do these things called, do these things called identity maps, right? So I think in a class on intersectionality, like I said, the reason I didn't make you read um, both the very classic notes on intersectionality and more very South Asia specific accounts of intersectionality is because I think you can't ever account for all the ways in which intersectionality plays out. All of us come to it from very different positionalities. So I think before we get into the readings, before we think of governance feminism, which is the first important reading I want to think through, and before we get into Ratna Kapoor's idea of like alterity, before that, I want us to just take a minute and jot down our what we think of as our own identity maps. Now, note that since we were talking about change in time, the way you identify might change over time. It might change from the if I asked you to do this at 8 a.m., it might look different from 8 p.m. Right? Like what you think of as important to your identity might be different depending on what conversation you just had, what exchange you just had, what you just heard. So I want you all to draw a circle in on the piece of paper, right, to the best of your ability. Do you want one? Yeah, just realized you don't. Okay. Draw a circle, and then I want you to imagine the center of the draw a circle, right? Like what? It's like waiting for the next 3 steps of my logic. Hey, a big circle, like a giant circle where you can write inside. Very good. Maybe I should start with that. Yeah, right. Draw a really big circle. A circle the size of, maybe I should start by drawing the circle. I have an extra thing. Okay, something like this, which since none of you can see, hey, that's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, since you drew a kutti circle on the inside, I also draw one. Okay, I want you to think of this center as like the core. You don't have to draw a slank circle inside. I was just drawing it to make Samrita feel better. Okay, so we're drawing circles on pieces of paper. Okay, so think of, we're just drawing a large circle, and think of this as your identity map, because we're starting the conversation on intersectionality. So I want you to think of the center of it as what is most core to your identity, right? Like, and I want you to take 10 minutes, right? So this is not just the 3 things that come up for you in the first page. I want you to think about this, right? So it can be, I'm someone who, I don't know, who's religious or does yoga or does, I don't know, how dare you? How dare you? The class also got cancelled because you put nazar. It was an excellent class. It got cancelled because of your nazar. Did you not get me started? That's why I'm decentered today. So whatever it is, right? And it doesn't have to be. I want you to just concentrate. I mean, to the more central it is. Imagine. I mean, I am. Maybe that's a pretty didactic, non-queer way to think about it. But the more central it is, the more, for purposes of identifying, more core it is. And then what are more peripheral ideas that are part of your identity? And maybe that's not how you read it, but it doesn't matter. I want you to think of all your different identities, right? And write them down. There's no right answer, but I really want you to start writing down. That's the first part of the exercise. So just take 5 to 7 minutes and write down all the ways in which you identify, using the space, given that we've put space on the table, using the actual physical space to make your own logics of whether something is important or not important, or like that, whatever, however you think about it. Like I'm not gonna give you instructions on how that should be, but yeah, let's start there, and then I'm gonna keep adding to it. Okay, you all seem to be pausing a little bit. Manogya, since I saw you put your pen down the first, you seemed really secure. You wrote a lot of words also. Wow. Okay. Do you want to get us started? Like, how did you start thinking about it? When you started to write, where did you want to put the words and what did you start thinking about it?
So I had also made a smaller circle first before you gave us the size.
Yeah.
So now there's a center and outward clear
Okay, great.
variation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started writing the inner words first, I think.
And the inner words were, how did you think of the inner words? As like things that were more central?
Right.
Okay.
More first thoughts.
Okay.
So of course, since we're sitting here, queer, feminist, female came first three words.
Yeah.
Naturally.
Because we're sitting here, very good. Yeah.
Yeah. Then disabled, couch potato, daughter. But then came learner, teacher, combination. I do teach 11th and 12th graders.
Yeah.
Then the point of hating hard work, writing, creating, taxing came in.
Yeah.
That's one of the core. Couch potato, the top ones.
Yeah.
Then atheist, liking beaches, water bodies of any kind, make you feel calm, and that's the core point.
Yeah.
Cousin, friend,
Other identities to others, yeah.
not liking pets also came in because that's a very big. I think another huge thing that has to go in is no music also.
This is central. This is, oh my God.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now wait, let's listen to this. Are you starting to want to edit your own pieces? Like, is Manogya giving you categories of like I listen to that and I'm like, wait, I hate Western music. Like when people show off how much they know, I want to give them like Tamil 80s music and be like, do you know this song? And I do not know whatever Katie, whatever sang. Like it's so central and global and problematic that music is seen as universal. And the same with people who assume everybody loves dogs. I mean, I have 2 dogs and I am not convinced by them.
Finally came skin sensitivity. I can remember the bedsheets not being soft enough, my clothes being God knows what.
Yeah.
So these, yeah, are primarily the core aspects.
And you think of them as identity.
They are the things that embody, affect me the most on a daily basis.
Amazing, yeah.
That's how
you live it like yourself. Yeah.
Interaction is the primary space for identity, right? Like I don't sit in my own. Yeah, I don't sit in my own room, sleep, and think about what my identity is. It doesn't matter. It's only.
But doesn't it matter? Isn't the whole point of the couch potato identity that you get to be on it on your own? And like the fact that you like soft things on your skin is not interaction.
No, but it only becomes problematic when people around me want me to wear something else or give me things that are like for me personally. I was comfortable being a girl or with identities given. The performance of that identity is a separate ballgame altogether. But in general, what I was called or what like just being there by myself, identity is not a factor. It's only interaction.
Absolutely.
My,
But I think even the examples that you've given, some of those feel like maybe to me interactional.
yes.
But some of them feel like identities that are core to you, but maybe not even primed interactionally. Because I can imagine that you wear a shirt that you don't like, and you're like, it's not about another person. And you're like, I am someone who doesn't like scratchy things. And that can be part of your identity. I think of that as actually helpfully individual as well, which is rare for identity, because identity is usually also interactional. Great. Well, thank you for getting us started. Thank you for getting us started, but also thank you for reminding us that the writing process was what came first to you, and then with thinking what came, and then when I said, hey, you put your pen down, you wrote some more.
Then I wrote down to once.
Correct. Correct. So then there's this idea of like how much time you give someone to talk about identity changes what they're likely to say about their identity. And also the things that first come out might not be the most important things. Like the fact that you experience surroundings as a physically sensitive person might affect you much more than gender, for example, right? But it can not seem as important because one of them is a contested category. Everyone talks about gender. We've decided that it's an established category to talk about. But the other things are not established or non-established categories, right? So then it brings up a question of what do we do with categories that are not established? What do we do with things that people don't think are real issues? And so that's really, really helpful. Others? can't read your name, but is it Aditi? Do you want to share?
Okay. So, sorry, this is my first class today, so I'm a little awkward.
This is, I promise you, you can meet her for 5 days and be awkward, and it's an acceptable, welcome identity.
So, I started with the center, and actually, my center is all I ams,
Huh.
and my outers are all I like, I dislike, I do, the doing sort of.
And did you think of that? Now you're thinking of that when you read it, or you thought of that when you wrote it?
In the process, I think I realized that I have a lot of I ams in the center.
Huh.
So,
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I also think that my outers are sort of all things that would make me likable or not likable to someone. Those are some exterior traits. I don't see them very interior to myself. At some level, they are interior to me, but they're more relational.
Huh.
So at the center, there's I started with I am a woman because not only because we're sitting in a gender class, but also because that is one thing that has shaped a lot of me and my experiences and why I'm sitting here today, in fact. So that, and then the second thing I wrote was a caregiver because it is a huge responsibility and it is
Yeah.
important. A researcher because that is what I do. And then I shifted to a little bit of I likes because I was like, because I realized what you said was I like. I was like, maybe I should add a little bit of that. So I like to sing, I like to read, and then I go back to I am. So I am neurodivergent, I am a feminist, I am queer after I write the outer.
Yeah, yeah.
And then back to the last thing I've written after I've completed everything is I'm tired.
Aren't we all? My God.
Yeah. No, I actually didn't. I haven't slept because I was traveling the entire night.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. So yeah, that was the.
And I have full empathy. I am empathetic.
Thank you. And the outers are I love to sleep, I love cats, I am a Savarna, which is something that I'm more cognizant of now, being more cognizant of now. I am sensitive. That is everything emotionally, mentally, physically, even.
Yeah.
Could relate to a lot of what you said. I love spicy food. I don't like crowds. I collect bookmarks. That's it.
Bookmarks.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry you haven't slept. And I totally feel it. I haven't slept for a week. Last night was the first night I have slept in 1 week, and it was excellent.
I'm glad.
Okay, someone else? Shivani.
I think similar to what she said, I also wrote about what I am in the middle. And
Yeah.
then I was thinking of what I like, things like that. And the first things that came to my mind was that I'm a woman and that I'm queer and I'm asexual and then social anxiety and I'm awkward. Then I'm Telugu. And I think the hardest one for me to write was that I'm upper caste.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a long time, when I came here and I was reading about caste and all of that, I just wanted to like forget about the fact that I am. You know, I didn't want to, I don't know, deal with my privilege. But then I was thinking about it, and I thought it was very insulting of me to not acknowledge it because I do have a privilege. I think acknowledging it is very important to, critiquing the caste system and everything as well. Because if I just dismiss who I am, like the fact that I have this much privilege, it is to say that this doesn't matter.
Totally, it's to neutralize the very
Yeah.
privilege that we think we. It's almost like we owe it to ourselves to have it. Yeah.
Because I know a lot of people in my community just don't use their last name because they think it's casteist, but I don't think it is. I think it's acknowledging that you come from a place of privilege.
Totally.
Which is important to critique.
And from the community, you mean from upper caste community that don't use it because it's casteist?
Because they
Because they don't want to call out their privilege. Fascinating.
I don't know if I'm explaining it.
Yeah, no. It's just I'm thinking of it. I remember a movement in the opposite direction, right? Like where it was seen as like unnecessary to use a last name because it was it was to do the opposite work of like challenging why we need to inherit caste. But it sounds like this is actually to reinforce caste. It's to say I do have privilege and I want my privilege to be invisible. Yeah, which is it's a different mechanism of doing the same thing.
Because I think it's insulting to people who don't have the privilege to say that, oh, my privilege doesn't matter to me. Because
it always matters to you.
Yeah, it always matters.
Yeah.
And I think some other things I wrote was I'm a middle child, that I like books, that I have short hair, I like faded colors.
You like favorite, what are your colors?
Faded colors.
Wow.
And then I wrote about
how. So very specific.
Beautiful. Because I think these are the things that first come to my mind when I think of myself.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I want like sweets that are sweet. Then I know that I like public transport and buses a lot.
You like buses a lot.
Yeah, I like buses.
I love it. Notice how the things, this might seem like too little, right? Like these might seem less, oh, that's like I didn't need to know you like faded colors, right? Like that's like, how is that helping me do theory?
I think that's how I
But if that's what's central to you, then it is actually producing an identity complex within you at the individual level. That is crucial. And like, I don't know, like maybe everyone doesn't need to know it. Maybe it is actually a privilege that we all get to know it. So thank you for sharing. But it's also central to identity, even if it's not an identity category that law or society or interactions have seeded to be a good identity category. So do you see the work we're doing here? It's essentially to say everything can be important if you start from that position of considering it. But also if you experience it as central to you, if the fact that you don't like crowds and you love buses are central to how you experience that space, then that is part of your identity, whether or not it is performed, whether or not it's interacted with, whether or not it's interactional. It is central to your identity. Navya, do you want to share?
Yes, I do. All right. So how I went about it is that first I started with the central ideas, which is basically how people perceive me when they first see me. So they don't really know me, but at a first glance,
I'm killing my second part of this exercise, but yes.
So it's basically a lot of people notice how long my hair is, and then they notice my voice, the way I dress, and they also notice my height. So a lot of people tell me that I'm really short. Yeah, and also
I don't know which direction that was going in as a short person.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right, and also a lot of people have made assumptions about my identity just because of the fact that because I am so busy with whatever I do, I don't date people. So all of my friends have an assumption that I'm asexual when I'm not really asexual. So I have this. I think I owe it to them to explain it to them that it's just that it's not something that I prioritize right now, and I really need to do my own thing. So this is something that I have gotten a lot recently, that a lot of my juniors, they come up to me and they say, hey, Navya, are you asexual? Which is really weird because
it's weird because you read that as like an incorrect category, or
yes.
Okay.
So it's just that you are basing a perception of, you don't even know me and you're just having a look at me and the work I do, and you're basing your perception of the work I do when it's not really the truth. And my secondary traits are basically when you get to know me or you've seen me in some or the other way. So it's basically my views on particular topics or the type of humor I use. And also the second part of it is, I think it's probably the next activity that you're talking about, which is basically the second phase. It's like, how close are you with me? So if you are really close with me, you know that I love traveling. I hate taking the local train and I hate public transport. and I'll stick to private transport as much as I can. And you'll also, if you are really close to me, you'll see, the capability, or, the logic aspect of me, or, what I really like to do, or, what I really want to pursue ahead in my career. So that is basically it.
But how much of this is identities? The likes and the dislikes, but are there core identity categories of like established So you said you're not asexual, but are there other identity categories that you identify with that you would put there?
So as of now, I think that I haven't really gotten to that phase where I'm, experimenting with myself. So
Not just one kind of. I mean more generally. Like so, for example, it's okay. So for example, my notes are in my category, right? It's I'm genderqueer, I'm Madrasi, I'm Savarna, and I'm a professor and I'm soft, right? Like those are my core identity categories. And I think of this because, similarly to you, like I feel like I out myself as Savarna, like as upper caste, the first day of every class that I ever teach, and especially in the US where they're like, oh, like this is where there isn't an understanding of it. I think it's important to like introduce that a lot of people in those spaces are deeply caste and I mean, in my case, not class privilege, but like often caste and class privilege, and come to it as neutralizing in a specific way, right? And so my outing of that identity is much more just a central part of how I think and how I experience the world, even if it's not something I myself identify with, right? And so, and then genderqueer is because it's important to me, and then professor is because I really think this is mostly what I do in life. It's like 80% of my time, so it's become like my big identity. And being from Madras is a really important part of my identity, and I think of that all the time. Like when someone says, "Are you from India?" I will always say, "I'm from Madras," and we're like, "Isn't that Chennai?" And I'm like, "Day." When I left, it was Madras. So it is Madras, right? Like there's a way in which these kinds of things are central to how I identify. So it's not just, so notice how there's a distinction between what you like, and I'm glad we're starting to think about this, versus how I identify. If someone says, so, hey, like, if I had to introduce myself, I would say, I'm so-and-so, I teach at so-and-so, I live in California, right? Like that would be the sore categories. But I'm glad we've started to talk about how other people view us, because the other people viewing us is sort of the second part of it. But maybe we get one more pair share. Shivani, do you want to go?
So mine also central is PhD scholar, because like I feel a lot of my interactions, everything, my whole experience currently depends on that.
So was PhD scholar the center?
Yeah, like one of the central things. And then it's like I'm poly, and then it's I'm queer, assigned female at birth, I'm neurodivergent. I love kindness. I'm an art lover, anti-caste. So like anti-caste is closer to me being privileged caste, but I wrote privileged caste earlier and anti-caste later. I think central were like experience based. Then the ones beyond are more like how I see my self internally, like kindness, loving, creative, soft, someone who loves to learn and teach. And then the most external are like I feel some experiences that have shaped my identity, like growing up in different places, experiencing sexual assault, being a Garhwali person, being enthusiastic about health, and a curious person. So
other things that like come together.
Who experience based, which then form my part of my identity.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So we're going to take a couple of more minutes, and now having heard everybody shared, you all, I mean, I've noticed some of you go back and write stuff as people were sharing. So maybe there's a way, I mean, I think part of that's telling us is that these intersections are also communal. When you hear someone else say something, you're like, oh shit, yeah, that's totally true about me too, right? Like there isn't identity categories are not fixed and static, and we're not, we don't all have them without a social movement or without a community or without interactions. Like it's not like you're born and you're like, these are my pronouns, right? Like there's just, maybe there should be, but there isn't, right? Like all of these are constricted based on how you interact with other people, how you intersect with other people over different ideas, and what that means for your own identity. So for the next 3 minutes, I want you to jot down how other people read you. Right. So you've written your own identity categories. Now I want you to and you in the same thing. So you could distinguish it by putting it in boxes or whatever, or like maybe in caps if you've been writing in cursive. But write it in a different way, because I want to see how, I mean, I'm going to write Kiran Bedi in a second, right? Like, but there's a way in which how you identify versus how others see you, and what that means for identity. So what kinds of things come up for other people when you see them?